Sam. We haven't actually formally been introduced. Some of you already know me because I've spoken at your schools previously. Actually, hands up if I have spoken to your year group. A few of you. Good to see you again. I'll be doing the talk in a moment, but I want to begin with the drama that we've just seen. Now, for those, hopefully everyone down the back could hear it well. So what were the three outside? What was their general aim in going to confession? What were they hoping to do?
Annoy the priest.
To annoy the priest, get a bit of a rise out of the priest.
Make fun out of it?
Yeah, to make fun out of it. Right, they're a little bit bored. I don't know if you have to do it at your school. There are some schools where you're forced to go to confession. Sometimes, I remember in primary school, I think it was nearly every week, but some schools once a month, some schools it's once a year or not even at all. But sometimes we can be in a situation where it's forced upon us. They're just trying to make a bit of fun. And they're trying to get a bit of a joke, bit of a rise out of the priest. Okay, what was the priest's reaction to these? What were the three outrageous sins that he committed?
Miley Cyrus.
All right, he convinced Miley Cyrus to do all this bad stuff. She was actually a really nice girl before she met Pete. Right? He created the Ebola virus. He happens to be a bit of a super freak in the chemistry lab. He created Ebola virus. Didn't mean to, but he's hurt a lot of people. And the third one, the anti-terrorism raids were as a result of him calling in some mates as a practical joke, who just happened to be Muslim. So, they're his three outrageous jokes. What was the priest's reaction? Sorry? He forgave Pete. Well, actually, what he said to Pete was, if you're truly sorry for what you've done, our Father in heaven forgives us our sins. Okay, the priest didn't bite at them trying to make a mockery of reconciliation. And it's quite difficult for us at times to get our head around the fact that no matter what we have done, that God does forgive us. That he loves us so much that he desires for us to be back with him, reconciled with him. Now, he asked Peter 5 times to say what? Jesus, you did all this for me and I don't give a stuff. How many times did he say it? Did anyone actually?
3.5.
About 3.5 times. The first two he kind of rattled off. The third time he's actually thinking about what he said. The fourth one he didn't get all the way through. He only got as far as, Jesus, you did all this for me. Now, what's happened to Pete just in that moment of staring at the crucifix and reeling off, Jesus, you did all this for me and I didn't give a stuff? What's happened to Pete in that time? Yeah. He simply realised what he's doing, what he's saying. The really cool thing is that this isn't just some cool little drama that the team just made up. This is based on a true story. This was from World Youth Day in Canada a number of years ago. This was a cardinal telling his story about how he became a practicing Catholic. He was going to a school where they had to go to confession all the time, and he and his mates decided to try and make a bit of fun out of confession. And so these schoolboys came up with these outrageous sins. Now, obviously they weren't the same as today. They were whatever was current in their little town in Canada at the time. But they made up these outrageous sins, and this guy went in, and that was actually what the priest gave him as his, I've gone blank, penance, thank you. It's actually what he gave him as his penance. His penance was to go outside into the church to forget about his mates and say 5 times, Jesus, you did all this for me and I don't give a stuff. That was his penance. He absolved him from his sins. He went out and he couldn't do it. He only got part way through and it broke him. And it is quite amazing for us when we do have that realisation that God loves us this much, or the way that we live our lives, we can push God right out to the side. And when we realise that we've done that, it's a bit of a horrible moment. A little bit like Peter the night before the crucifixion, when he realises that he's abandoned Jesus, or he's disowned him 3 times. And Peter went off and wept bitterly. There's that moment of realisation. So I want to use that into the talk that I'm going to give. And the talk I'm going to give is on reconciliation. Now, for those who don't know me, I walked around the world, or 15,500 kilometres around the world, from Brazil to Spain, from 2006 to 2008. I'm going to use a lot of that journey as a basis for this talk. So the red line up there on that map is where I actually walked. As you can see, I didn't walk the whole way around the world. The objective wasn't to make it into the Guinness Book of Records. Okay, this was a missionary journey that was about prayer. I was actually walking around the world inviting people to pray for unity. That's a whole different talk though. But I'm just going to use the journey itself to try and pick apart the idea of reconciliation a little bit. I want to put it into some sort of context though, because just looking at that map doesn't really do it justice, because forget about the length of the red line. The width of it alone is like walking from here to Bowral, near Sydney. Just the width of the red line is from about here to Bowral. So it's difficult to, I think, put into perspective what it's like day in, day out walking that far. Just from João Pessoa on the easternmost point of Brazil to Edmonton in Canada took 1 year to walk that far. It took me 19 months to complete the whole journey. The journey itself, though, was reasonably simple. Okay, walk to draw attention to the need to pray for unity, and stop in every single church I passed along the way, whether it's Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, Pentecostal, Evangelical, non-denominational or interdenominational, and invite them to pray for unity. It's a very difficult mission to execute though. I had to learn 9 languages from scratch while crossing through 22 countries. I was held at gunpoint on 3 occasions, once with a rifle, once with a semi-automatic, and once with this shotgun. It took a lot of negotiation to eventually get the photograph after being held at gunpoint. I was robbed at knife point by 4 men. I was beaten up on the side of the road a number of times, including this occasion in Russia. I had just managed to escape from those 2 guys after they beat me up. They had ripped the top strap off my backpack. They'd broken my 2 carbon fibre walking poles in half. They'd put their fingernails through the webbing in my hands during the fight. At this stage I've turned and I'm beginning to run and get out of there because a 3rd guy is running down the hill towards me, also dressed in black, but carrying a bottle of vodka in his left hand, whistling out to the other 2 guys because he wanted in on the fight. So I had to get out of there as quick as I could. I woke up twice in the middle of the night in 2 different countries with a man in my room. On both accounts though, they were not in my room to rob me. They had come into my room to get into bed with me. And I woke up with their hand on me. That's what's woken me up. Had to fight these guys off. Very scary thing to wake up to. Apparently though, I was an attractive guy with my beard. But it made it very difficult to fall asleep from then on. I came face to face with a lot of dangerous animals. Nearly lost my life a number of times. Particularly I was stung by a scorpion. That stopped my heart beating a few times. Came face to face with a puma in South America. That's a coyote, that one. That poor tarantula died 10 seconds later when a car ran over it. It didn't last too long. I walked around a lot of active volcanoes, had a big earthquake of 6.2 at one stage. I walked through temperatures from 47 degrees Celsius on a 42 kilometre day all the way down to minus 33 degrees Celsius on a 45 kilometre day. I was hospitalised quite a few times. I had salmonella poisoning, typhoid fever, food poisoning 4 times. Walking down a road in Mexico, I was looking up a big mountain. I trod in a hole and dislodged my hip. That had to be put back in. I tore the cartilage really badly in both knees to the point where the left knee locked solid, strained both Achilles tendons, had a heart arrhythmia, and I had a cut on my left big toe. Now that little cut might look like the least of my worries compared to everything else going on around me. But because I'm walking 35 to 55 kilometres every day, particularly through the heat and humidity of the tropics, that little cut was becoming worse and worse. And it got to the point where the flesh was pushing halfway out across the nail and it had to be operated on. It was operated on in Panama, in Central America. The surgeon did a fantastic job and I was able to walk on. But about 8 or 9 months later, whilst crossing through the United States, it split open for a second time and had to be operated on again, this time in Billings, Montana. Now this is not third world medicine. Okay, this is St. Vincent's Hospital in the city of Billings. It's a new hospital, great facilities and great doctors. But the doctors had a meeting at the end of my bed and then turned to me and asked, "So Sam, what's your pain threshold like?" I said, "Average." And they said, "Well, we're really sorry, but you've got a bad infection in that toe. It might even be a staph infection. There isn't enough blood circulation for the anaesthetic to distribute properly. We're going to operate. We're just not going to use anaesthetic. We're not going to numb it. We need you to grit your teeth, don't flinch. We'll be as fast as we possibly can." My little brother Christopher had just flown in from Tasmania to join me for a month's worth of walking. He studied nursing amongst a few other degrees. He didn't care about his older brother. He wanted to see what happens when you operate without anaesthetic. So with the doctor's permission, he sat in on the surgery with a video camera and filmed, interviewing the doctor. They had their medical speak going back and forwards while she grabs pliers, cuts the big toenail in half right down to the bed, rips half the nail out. It snapped on the way out, so she had to go back and get the bits still embedded, pull those out, cut the flesh away, patched it all up, all while Chris continues filming and then has the audacity to turn to me and go, "Sucking in your big sook," and continue to ask his questions. So it's a very simple mission, but a very difficult journey. One thing I struggled with particularly wasn't necessarily forgiving my brother for being an absolute turd, but forgiving those who had beaten me up, who held me at gunpoint. There were so many occasions when my life was threatened that in time I began to want to... Well, is that going to come up? Here we go. In time I began to really want retribution. I wanted to fight these guys again. In fact, the guys that... there's a number of different beatings and muggings and at gunpoint, etc. But there was one in particular in Costa Rica where some guys had held me at knife point. They'd mugged me, stripped me clean. I actually had an opportunity to thump these guys and chose not to. Chose to let them take everything. It was really difficult to do. But I kept revisiting that. I can tell you, in my head, I am awesome at Kung Fu. I am phenomenal in my head. Now, in reality, it's been proven from the fight in Russia, if you've ever been in a dream and you're trying to get away from something, you're trying to run, and you just can't seem to move, that's actually what I was like in the fight. I think adrenaline was pumping so much that everything felt like it was triple the weight, and I struggled to defend myself. But in my head, I'm awesome at Kung Fu. And I kept revisiting this mugging in Costa Rica. And I beat those guys senseless so many times in my thoughts. I wanted to go back and find these guys. I wanted that moment back. And there were more moments still to come. And so the problem was that I was going to become more and more aggressive because I wanted retribution. I wanted to be able to prove that I could have beaten those guys. So I had to continually learn to forgive and to continually re-forgive. So here, Mark 11:25, when you stand to pray, forgive anyone against whom you have a grievance, so that your heavenly Father may in turn forgive you in your transgressions. This journey was just a massive exercise in that. You can't go through that many muggings, beatings, bedroom invasions, etc., etc. So many people running off the road to try and kill me, to run me over. People throwing things out of cars at me to try and kill me. A bit racially motivated because I was a white guy. I was rejected from hotels because I was a white guy. I was rejected because I was Catholic. That happened so many times. And there were a lot of times when I genuinely wanted to be able to retaliate. And so it was difficult. This was a whole lesson. The whole journey was a lesson in letting go, in actually forgiving these people. Of course, I had to keep revisiting that. Time and time again, I would forgive. And then I'd find out a week later, my thoughts are back on retribution. I've already forgiven them, but I need to go back to it. So this is from Matthew. Then Peter, approaching, asked him, "Lord, if any brother sins against me, how often must I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus answered, I say to you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Now, I would assume in this case, Jesus is talking about someone repeatedly sinning against you, hurting you. But it's funny, even with one sin against me, one overstepping the line, I kept revisiting it. It kept being multiple times. It hurt me multiple times beyond that one occasion. And we can all be in that situation where someone has hurt us, we think we've gotten over it, we think we've forgiven us, and then we take that forgiveness back. And we go, nah, stuff them. Almost like the drama. Jesus, you do all this for me and I don't give a stuff. So I was like, no, I forgave them, but you know what? They just did something else, so stuff them. I'm taking that forgiveness back. It can be a very difficult journey to forgiving those around us. We also, though, need to take something else into account. Most of us, I don't think, struggle too much with forgiving others. We can get there. I think there's a realisation when we're forgiving other people, we're realising that they aren't perfect. And really, if they've hurt us, that doesn't actually impact on our dignity. That person hurting me, they just didn't recognise the dignity that I have. There's nothing arrogant in saying that. They honestly didn't see how beautiful I am. And that's why they hurt me. Right? We can usually get to a point where we can forgive those around us. Over the course of the walk, I had a lot of opportunity to look at all this, just to think about all the stupid stuff I'd done over time. And I was sharing this with a priest. It was actually in the United States, a guy called Father Hugo. And he asked me the question, so what do you do when you're walking? You've got 10 to, probably between 5 and 15 hours every day walking. I said, what do you do? Because I didn't have an iPod, I didn't have a telephone, I've got nothing electronic except my video camera. I said, I take photographs. I said, I sing a lot. I actually did. I sang a lot while I was walking. Got embarrassed myself a few times and I thought I was in the middle of nowhere. And then I'm singing loudly and all of a sudden a head would pop up behind a rock because there's a guy sitting there. So I did that a few times. One time I was actually doing I shouldn't actually say this. I was doing singing Swing Low Sweet Chariot, an African slave song, but I was singing it in 2 harmony parts. But you can't sing harmony by yourself, so I'm singing one then singing the other. So it would actually sound absurd, but in my head it sounded good. And there's a guy sitting off to the side of the road who just literally popped up out of the grass and stared at me. It was the most bizarre. I said hello and he didn't say anything in response, he just kept staring at me. So I'd sing a lot. I also spent a lot of time just contemplating. I spent a lot of time praying as well, but a lot of time contemplating. And I said to this Father Hugo, I probably have gone through every aspect of my life, everything I've done wrong, and then I kind of looked through it. And he said probably the obvious question. He said, has that been helpful? I said, I'm not really sure. And we had a really long conversation about it. And in the end he said, Sam, you know what your problem is? He said, you've forgiven those who've hurt you. You've accepted God's forgiveness of yourself, but you've never forgiven yourself. You've never actually let go of guilt. You've never forgiven yourself. And he actually gave me some spiritual exercises to do while I was walking on from there, as far as learning to deal with that. So this is the next big thing. 1, we're called to forgive those around us, but don't forget to forgive yourself. Right? We aren't perfect. We are beautiful and created with dignity, but don't forget to forgive yourself. The third thing that I want to touch on is this. It's from the letter to St. James, or the letter to James from Paul. So, the prayer of faith will save the sick person and the Lord will raise him up. If he has committed any sins, he will be forgiven. Therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. Okay, so we're actually called to actually confess our sins to one another, not to simply say to God, oh, please forgive me. We're actually called to take that step, because in doing so, to confess our sins to one another, and by the way, the beautiful thing is within the church, the priest stands in on behalf of us. That's why we have confession. The priest is there on behalf of the church, on behalf of Jesus. So we confess our sins to one another. There's a certain ownership involved in stepping out to do that. I want to finish with a story from Venezuela, a very dangerous country, currently averaging around 52 or 54 murders a day, second most dangerous country on the planet. I arrived into a small town called Karora, and when I went up to the Catholic Church, I was introduced to the priest. I told him what I was doing, showed him my official letters, and the priest, it wasn't overly enthusiastic, and he said, "Oh, just wait here." And he walked off back behind closed doors and didn't come back. So it's just kind of awkward. I'm standing in the foyer of this church wondering, how much longer do I stay here? Is he actually coming back? And then a guy walks in off the street, comes up to me and says, in English, says, "Are you the guy walking around the world?" I said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "Oh, the priest rang me." He said, "I'm the English teacher at the high school." He said that you were walking around the world and that you needed accommodation or something. I said, "Oh, well, yeah." I said, "I'm okay to stay at a hotel, though." It was more that I was passing an invitation to pray for unity onto this priest. And the teacher said to me, "So what am I supposed to do with you?" So I don't know. I said, I'm actually pretty embarrassed that you were called. I said, I didn't need a translator. Habla español. I speak enough Spanish. And we're literally both looking at each other, turning our palms up, and this guy said, well, what's your mission? And I explained the mission to him, what I was doing. He said, I used to be a Catholic, but he said, I've got nothing to do with the church anymore. He said, a couple of my friends are like Protestant Christians. He said, "Do you want to meet them? I could maybe make a few phone calls and you can meet them." So that'll be great. So Raphael I went with him, we had lunch at his house, and he jumped on the telephone and he organised for 3 different churches, for the ministers and a few people from their congregations to come together in the courtyard of one of the ministers, out the back of their house, and to have a meeting. Now when we came together, none of them spoke English, only Raphael. And as we got further into the conversation, I realised that my Spanish was pretty poor, so Raphael said, "Look, it's okay, you speak English, I'll translate." And so we started doing that. To begin with, everyone was very standoffish. They wanted nothing to do with me. They thought, here comes a Catholic trying to make everyone Catholic, and they wanted to continue Luther's fight of the protest, so they wanted to, rebuke me. And so in the end, Raphael's having to fight for me, because Raphael's understanding what the mission was about, so he's gone into fight for me a little bit. Eventually they started to be won over, in that they realised that the invitation was simply to pray for each other, to pray for complete unity in truth and in love. And then one of them actually started laughing because they said something, and I didn't hear what they'd said, and I looked to Raphael for help and he was laughing as well. Apparently one of them, because I had a good sized beard at that point and I had long hair, and one of them, eventually, once they'd been won over, said, "He actually looks a lot like Jesus." And from that point on, I was accepted. We had this fantastic conversation about the need for complete unity within the church. At the end of the day, Raphael organised accommodation for me, and I walked on. About a week later, I received an email from Raphael. And he said, "Dear Sam, so I just wanted to thank you for visiting our town of Karora." He said, "At no stage, though, did you invite me to pray for unity." He said, "I just wanted to let you know that after you left, I was thinking about how the priest had treated you, that he had palmed you off. And I was so angry that the priest had done that, whereas the other Christians took you in eventually. But he said, after a while, I realised that was exactly how I treated God. The way that priest had treated you was how I treated God. I had pushed him away." He said, "I haven't been to Mass in 20 years. I haven't prayed in 20 years. He said, "Before I went to bed that night, I found myself not being able to go to bed until I prayed for the first time in 20 years. And he said, "So I actually knelt down beside my bed and prayed a prayer like I did when I used to when I was a little kid." He said, "Then the next morning, I found that I couldn't actually get out of bed until I prayed a quick prayer to begin my day. And then when I went to have breakfast, I realised I hadn't actually thanked God for even the food that I ate for the last 20 years. So he said, I said grace for the first time in 20 years. And he said, and then after breakfast and sitting there for a while, I thought I probably should go to Mass. He He said, I just want you to know that I've been going to Mass every day since you visited here. But again, you didn't actually invite me to pray for unity. I was just your translator. But I want you to know that even if the other Christians that were gathered there didn't take on the mission, I'm praying for unity every day, and I'm back in the church. That was about 6 years ago. I received an email about 3 months ago from Raphael. He just recently got married, and they've just had their first son, whose name's Samuel. And when I think of reconciliation, it's in those terms of Raphael. He got to a point of realising something. It wasn't that he was sitting there going, Jesus, you do all this for me, I don't give a stuff. It wasn't that he was saying that, but he saw in someone else actions that he despised and realised that it was actually pointing back at himself. He realised that the way that he lived his life was actually by pushing God to the side. He had walked away from the church for certain reasons, but he realised that it was him who walked away from God, not God who walked away from him. And it's just that realisation of turning back, to reconcile, to turn around. And so he has turned back to God and come back. Now, hopefully in this story somewhere he also went to confession. I'm sure he had 20 years worth of confession. But he'd already begun the process of reconciling with God. Now, we're going to have an opportunity in a moment to do a couple of things. One is that there will be, I think, 4 priests available for reconciliation. Now, this is a wonderful opportunity. If you haven't met reconciliation for a long time, do not be scared of it at all. These are genuinely friendly priests, correct? These are generally priests that aren't listening to me. Correct, yeah. Okay, Father Paul at least is friendly. Okay. Just give us a smile and that will answer the question. There we go. Okay. So there are going to be 4 priests. Is it 4? Yep, we've got 4 priests available. Whereabouts will you be? And down there. Okay. We will have a few people helping us out, perhaps to direct people to reconciliation. And don't worry if you don't know what to say. Simply go in to the priest and say, I'm not really sure what to say, and they'll guide you through reconciliation. It's an opportunity simply to turn back to God, to come back, to cover the gaps that may have appeared in the relationship. Whether it be through directly our relationship with God or our relationship with other people, and not identifying Christ in them, not identifying Jesus in them, by pushing them away. And we've unwittingly pushed God away as well. There will also be a large group activity that we're going to do here whilst that is happening. Now, at any stage, you are welcome to jump out to go to reconciliation. And when you finish with reconciliation, to come back into the large group activity. Before we head off, though, it's good just to go through a quick examination of conscience. You might be sitting there going, yeah, I haven't really done anything bad. I'm okay. But then when you start reading something like this, you go, yeah, okay, right, I may not have done anything bad, but I may not have done that. And yep, I probably fell short with that. So it's important for us to go through a very quick examination of conscience. There are 3 different screens. So I'm going to put it up. This one is loving God. Okay, does God come first in my life? Have I given into the pressures of my life and left God out? That was a huge one for me growing up. Particularly as a teenager, I played AFL football, I was studying mechanical engineering at university. I'm surrounded very male chauvinistic culture. It was very easy to just push God out. It was difficult to have God front and centre. Have I spent time with Jesus each day in prayer? Have I spoken his name and with respect and reverence? Have I participated in Mass willingly? Have I cared for his creation? Have I been grateful to God for all he has given to me? Have I remembered to ask God for the things I need? Am I prepared to stand up for my faith? Now you might look at that second last one and go, hang on a second, why on earth would you take that to confession? Have I remembered to ask God for things I need? But aren't I actually helping him by not giving him more work to do? Why on earth would you take that? What this is about, that second last one, is actually recognising that God has the ability to help and wants to help. And instead we turn away and say, no, I don't want your help. I'll deal with it myself. And pushing God away in that respect. So we become very self-focused. Loving myself. Just have a quick read through of some of these. Have I cared for my body by sleeping, eating, drinking and exercising responsibly? Have I used the gift of my sexuality, that should be, according to the plan of God? Have I respected myself by clothing myself appropriately? Like, this is actually my dad's t-shirt. I didn't steal it, I borrowed it, that's appropriate. He said he didn't want it. The funny thing was he didn't realise that I'd given it to him the year before as a birthday present. I told him that, he was a bit embarrassed. Anyway, it's now mine. Have I respected myself by clothing myself appropriately, by not harming myself physically or putting myself in dangerous situations? Have I cared for my mind by choosing movies, books, websites, games, etc. that feed my mind with positive thoughts and images? Things that bring me closer to God, that help me to love. Have I cared for my spirit by avoiding activities that are anti-God, such as spells, tarot cards, horoscopes, fortune tellers, etc.? Have I cared for myself by choosing friends who encourage me to be a better person and who help me make positive, healthy, respectful choices? And are we actually the person within our group who does that, who encourages that? Or do we encourage the opposite of the friends around us? Do I try to be honest with myself? Am I truthful in expressing myself to others? Are only these kind of ringing true? Or is everyone going, no, none of these apply to me? I'm sure most of us have a few of these at some point. If none at all apply to you, then my goodness, then we can probably canonise you now. These are everyday things that we genuinely struggle with. Loving my neighbours is the last one. Have I treated my parents and siblings with love and respect? Have I been able to identify Jesus in them? We seem to don't have too much of a problem in identifying Jesus in the homeless, but when it comes to siblings, it's kind of thrown out the door at times. Unless you're a Kirk, like. Have I done my part to help out in my family and home? Have I treated my friends and colleagues with kindness and their belongings with respect? Have I hurt others by lying or speaking badly about them, judging them rashly or holding grudges? Have I hurt others by stealing, cheating, teasing, bullying, gossiping or vandalising? Am I jealous of others' possessions? Now, this is huge. Don't just think of your friends. Am I jealous of rich people's possessions, famous people who are just being famous? Am I jealous of the life that they have? Have I been generous and shared my time, my talents and my possessions with those who need it? Have I been ready to help others when a friend is faced with difficult challenges such as teen pregnancy, abuse, drugs or underage drinking, pornography, self-harm, bullying or depression? Have I kept secrets that I should not have kept, where you could have actually helped someone by getting someone else involved? Have I been ready and willing to talk about issues peacefully, ready to see another's point of view, ready to apologise and forgive when I need to? That last one, have I been ready and willing to talk about issues peacefully? Give me one area where we mostly would have seen on the internet where you do not see that. Social media, specifically comments on YouTube. Have you ever read the comments on YouTube? My goodness. That's the kind of have I been ready and willing to talk about issues peacefully? Not just slam the other person and tell them they're an absolute idiot for what they believe. this is an opportunity as we go into reconciliation to take those things to God where we know we haven't quite lived up to the standard of love. And to be able to say, you know what, I want to cover that gap, and God, I need your grace to help me to do that. It's an opportunity to set a new course. For some, that is turning completely around. For others, it's a readjustment. I've been trying to, but I just haven't quite. And there's been all these different pressures. So that'll be there. So feel free to jump off to reconciliation if you like. We have chairs set up down the back. So if you want to go to reconciliation, please jump on there, and we'll go from this end. So the end that Father Paul is on, my right-hand side, when you get down there, on your left, that'll be the end. That's where the first person is. And so you go to that end, and you move along. Got it? And you go out from there to the 4 places. What we're going to do, though, is do a large group activity whilst this is happening. So, can I get everyone to please grab their chairs? I'm not sure, we should be able to fit almost. We need to create a large circle. Now, we're going to need to have the sound desk outside the circle, so you could make it not quite a circle, but go around and out, all the way up here, around out there, and then back in, but on the carpet. So create a big circle and everyone facing inwards with your chair. Thank you.
You're on my chair. Sorry. Alright. Stand that high. No, you stand on the middle one. Stand on the middle one. Move back. Yeah, move that chair.
There's plenty of room up here near me.
Yeah, you can start pushing a bit.
Guys, there's heaps of room up here, so if you're carrying the spaces, come up this way.
What kind of circle? Who made that circle?
Okay, does everyone have a seat? Do an activity. It's an opportunity for us to action some of the things that have perhaps pricked our conscience while we've been sitting there and just reading through that examination of conscience. I'm going to ask Tim to come out. Normally in this activity we'd have this person wearing a full-face balaclava. Instead, Tim went and grew a beard for us, so that'll do fine. Tim, could you grab a seat, please, up here? Tim actually has no idea what's about to happen to me. So, Tim is sitting in here, representative of the people in your life that you have hurt, perhaps even yourself. He's also, in a way, representative of the sin in your life. Okay? Tim represents all the different things on that board, on the screen, that pricked our conscience, where we know we haven't quite lived up to what God would want of us. And what we're going to do in a moment, we have the music guys, the music ministry, actually sing, and it'll be a prayer. It's not simply that they're singing a pop song, they're singing a prayer on our behalf. And we're going to keep this as a silent time. And in this silence, I'm going to invite you to come forward to grab a piece of string, just one piece of string, and to ruin it. There we go. To grab a piece of string, Tim, can I get you to put your arms down beside the chair? That's it. to come up, and we're going to tie Tim to the chair and pole. Now, when you tie Tim, however you might tie him, you might tie it around the ankle or his arm or even back on the pole. Just before I even say why we're doing this, a bit of obvious precaution here. He needs blood. Right? Do not cut it off. When we tie Tim, he needs to be able to breathe and have blood circulation. So tie it so that you can still fit at least your finger underneath it. There's a little bit of give there. But when we tie it on, we're going to actually say out loud, not, Jesus, you did all this for me and I don't give a stuff, but Jesus, with this string, I bind my sin. But I'd like you to be conscious of something specifically, where you know that you have either hurt someone or you have been hurt and you haven't been able to forgive. So an area where you know that you could do better, where you would genuinely love God to help you to love more. So we're going to tie this string on anywhere, and to actually pray the prayer, we actually do say it out loud, not too loud, it's not for everyone to hear. Tim can hear you say it, everyone else doesn't need to. But with this string, I bind my sin, or with this string, I bind my hurt. Okay, to tie it on, spend a moment there, and then return to your seat. Okay, it's that simple. Now, I'd like you to keep this as quiet, as silent as possible. Tim, I'm going to ask you to remain as still as possible. You are that. This is actually, it is actually a very privileged position that Tim's in that he is their representative of these hurts in our life. So it's going to be a quiet time, and then once we've had an opportunity to each tie the string there and to tie Tim to the chair and the pole, I'll give you some further instructions. So if the music ministry guys could lead us in prayer.